Yeah. So, okay, cool. And with the caveat that, in the middle of that, this was a time when I was still running this company and still like thinking that, it's kind of salesy. So I'll skip over that kind of stuff. But I was really trying to ride this citizen science wave, because this was more than our company, but this was something that I'm continue to be really interested in, is like the boundaries of professional science and engineering and uh, amateur enthusiasm. And so I've been really interested in that for like a decade. This our whole thing started from not a robot necessarily, but we had a story before the robot, which was this. There was rumors of gold lost in this cave in Northern California from the gold rush era, and it was like we just took this story and we just got so much mileage out of it, because that was the reason that we got started, and we started building this robot, and this was the first prototype that we had made in Eric's garage. And I don't even think this one worked. It just, we put the pieces together and we're starting to hack it together. And I was telling Eric, I was like, I think we can make this a bigger thing. Let's just document it and share it online and see what happens. And so we just created this website. It was not, we were just copying whatever DIY drones was doing. And so we started this, and, it, for a lot, years, it was a handful of us, like you can see 59 new members. So that actually was probably years into it. But it started really small for a long time. And we did go to the cave, and that just, like, for some reason, that just got a New York Times article and so much interest. And then we decided to put together this kit and sell that on Kickstarter. And so we started shipping these kits all around the world, like hundreds of these things. Not thousands, it was still hundreds. But when everyone started having the same base, like that's when the collaboration really got interesting. And then we sent them all over the world. This is kind of the marketing stuff. I mean, they were everywhere, and people were starting to send videos of what they were seeing. So by this time, the robot was starting to work. It was still finicky. These are like, that guy almost crashed into these glass sponges that, those are some of the oldest species on the planet. So he almost just destroyed like one of the oldest ecosystems. So we have to be careful. And we started, like, this is when we started realizing that we actually had a little more responsibility than just sending anything we want all over.
How deep is it?
What's that?
Oh, sorry. How deep was the video?
That one it's a good question. It looks like it's about 108 meters. So it's like, wow, 300 some feet. That was like a really arbitrary design constraint, but we picked 100 meters as our goal always. So that was one of these weird things where, like, I think you guys will find this, like, you end up like having these weird design constraints that sometimes you choose them arbitrarily, and sometimes they're chosen for you. And a good example of one being chosen for us was, we found shipwrecks and things like that, was the tether, right? Because there was this really interesting problem of this drag, like the thrust to drag ratio with the tether. And so Eric was like, there has to be a way to get these. Actually, I'm going to go back, because this was like the big breakthrough, this moment on the forum, when Walt did this teardown of this home plug adapter, and we figured out we can do Ethernet over power line, and actually use that for communications. We can use a really thin twisted pair, which totally changed the game for what we could do in terms of like tether thickness, which was really interesting, because when we got started, we had all these professional ROV people, like, oil and gas people, who we were telling about our project. And they were like, that's cute, but this is not, like, one of them said, this is never going to work, you guys. Like, it's just not going to work. And he, like, years later at an ocean conference, he stood up and he said, I really have to apologize to these guys, because they did something I didn't think was possible. And of course, we didn't know. We just had nothing better going on, so we kept trying different stuff. And luckily, we met Walt, who made that kind of weird technical breakthrough. Of course, there's all these people. It's cool. And then we made a really, I think, a decision that, like, looking back, was a major decision. This was like in 2006, 2015. There were starting to be people in our forums, like a group like Blue Robotics, who were starting to make better kits than we were. Like, they made these wonderful thrusters. They figured out that that was like this weird problem, like this weird technical problem that was worth really zeroing in on. That could work underwater. And we decided at that time, because we had a little bit of venture capital money, so we were like, we're going to make the DJI of underwater drones. Because we thought, like, our friends at 3D Robotics had just gotten like slammed. They'd just gotten killed by DJI because the Phantom was super easy to use. So we thought we were going to make something that's really easy to use, and we're going to, get a lot of these out there, et cetera, et cetera. And we made that, and it was really like, this was really a cool product, actually. I'm really proud of it. But it just took us way longer. We were on Kickstarter. We did Kickstarter again and raised $1 million, and it just took us really long to manufacture it. And at the same time, I'll show you a different slide. Can you see all my slides? Can you see my whole screen?
Yep.
And then, like, a year after that, like, all of a sudden, Amazon was full of all these, like, mostly Chinese knockoffs that were like cheaper and getting really good really fast, and they were revving in like 3 to 6 months, and we just couldn't deal with that. We just didn't have the capital or really like the guts to do it. But the other thing that was interesting about that time was that all of a sudden it became a company, and we had like 25-ish people, and all of our customers were like bass fishermen and people who were just like complaining about, XYZ. And all of a sudden it just got like way less fun. And there was no like distinct moment that happened. But at the end, I realized this isn't anywhere near as fun as when we were starting. And like the people that we're working with and for aren't really the people like I aspire to be like serving. And so anyways, that was just an observation. It's like, be careful who you're working for. Meanwhile, Blue Robotics, like, who just kept making the kits and like staying on that path, has like built a really small, cool, profitable little business selling parts. And they're building better ROVs, and they're doing a lot of cool things. And so I can talk more about the citizen science stuff. John Dobson is one of my heroes. He's the guy who created the Dobsonian telescope, which was a super low cost way to build telescopes, and was like a real pioneer for the resurgence of amateur astronomy.
What's the telescope called?
What's that?
What's the telescope?
It's the Dobsonian telescope. So he was a monk who his name's John Dobson. He's very worth reading his story. Another good book is this one. This one is called Seeing in the Dark, and tells the story of amateur astronomers. And he was tasked by the church to like figure out, to try and reconcile modern astronomy with like the church teachings. And so he started making telescopes in the monastery and just became obsessed with them, and just got kicked out of the monastery, and then created this really interesting way, like this mount, like this alt-azimuth mount, where you could have really big aperture lenses, and you could make these things for less than $50 or $100. And he spent the rest of his life on street corners just trying to get people to look at the moon. But the CCDs came around, and all of a sudden, the internet, made it easy to share, and this was a big part of this resurgence in amateur astronomy that's still going on today. I mean, the amateurs are like, astronomy is one of the scientific disciplines where amateurs kind of work really closely with professionals. They work on different things, but anyways, so he's a real kind of hero of mine, of like someone who just figured out this low cost, interesting way, and then figured out this, well, he didn't figure it out. Like, there was just this confluence of the internet and CCD devices and other things. And so I was looking around, because we were building this at Tech Shop, at the time, and I was kind of looking around at all these other people who were building interesting things and asking interesting questions. And one of those groups was actually across the garage. I mean, this was the same garage that we started building OpenROV in, and this group wanted to build satellites because they had seen the CubeSat standard and they realized that they could build, satellites for much cheaper than, traditional. They were working at NASA at the time. And so they started a company and they started launching their own satellites. And now I think it's called planet.com. And now they're like getting an image of every location on Earth every day. And, it's a multi-billion-dollar company. And so I told that story. And then, my friends were building these listening devices for monitoring poaching in the rainforest. And it was just old cell phones. You raised money on Kickstarter. And I was just seeing this everywhere, like $1 origami microscopes, DIY Geiger counters used in Japan. All of this interesting stuff happening at these DIY biospaces, like open source PCR machines and lab automation equipment, which ended up actually being somewhat useful during the pandemic. A lot of this stuff did. Anyway, so I became really curious about what this meant, what like low cost tools and tinkering and meant for the future of science. And so then I started thinking about, getting interested in citizen science, which was this kind of burgeoning academic movement to incorporate amateurs. And that's kind of been frankly disappointing. Like the academic stuff has been, Ben Cat had a great tweet storm about this recently, but anyways, so that's kind of the things I learned. I'm happy to talk more about any of it. Like if you want to talk about the early days, like how we got started and got things off the ground. Is it worth getting things going and speeding up and building a community? Or I don't know, whatever your questions are, I'm happy to take them. And I'd actually love to hear kind of what, more about your goals and aspirations are for this project, for the project itself, but also for your aspirations individually. So anyway.
Before we do that, David, I think it would be nice to get a glimpse of your other talk as well. So what you've done since quitting the OpenROV project, the experiment.com platform, and the stuff you're up to now on science funding. So can you speak to that a little bit as well?
Yeah. So let's see this. Can you see this? This slide? Okay, cool. So I became really interested in crowdfunding and also just like the sharing aspect of this whole thing, because we got started on Kickstarter and that was just such a transformational experience for me. And we also shipped so many robots to scientists, and I became really disillusioned with all my scientist friends. And I was really worried about them because they're all so obsessed with publishing. They only care about publishing papers. And I think that's really like disconnected from reality in a lot of ways. And I also think it's kind of hurting science. And so my friends started an Experiment, which is a crowdfunding site for science, and they were about to shut it down last year. And I was like, let's hold on a second. I think we can do some really cool stuff with it. And so they've basically given me the keys. And there's a bunch of DIY science stuff that this is really, the stuff that's happening here is really kind of on the line that I was talking about of amateur and professional science. And so now I'm in charge of experiment.com, and I've started a nonprofit, and I'm running all of these weird science funding experiments that all of the science funders don't have the guts to actually try. So I'm doing quadratic funding. We're experimenting with this idea of science angel investors. So just giving people budgets of like $50,000 or $100,000 and letting them decide which projects to fund. And then I just launched an NFT for a scientific project where my friend Eric and I are going back to the garage, and we're going to be building a pressure chamber that can test materials down to full ocean depth. So if you go to, I'll show you the website. You can read about it there. That's scibetter.com/experiment. But that's kind of our thinking around how NFTs could be used to create this kind of alternate IP for science. So that's what I'm doing right now. This like you guys have an experimental year of trying to figure out what this project could be or might be. I'm having an experimental year of like radical science funding experiments. And it's been honestly really interesting. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Excellent. So before we open it up to Q&A, Joshua joined late. So do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. I'm Joshua Wilcox. I'm a hardware consultant based out of the Bay Area here. I'm just south of San Francisco. I've actually hung out in Pseudo Room Counterculture Labs a little bit, kind of know those people a bit. Cool. And I generally help our early stage hardware startups get through those pains and build their first MVP and scale up.
Those are the fun days.
Yeah, they're the best days.
Right. So let's kick off the Q&A. I had sort of a broad sort of context-setting question. What do you, like, besides OpenROV, what do you think are the sort of milestone projects of this kind? You mentioned the Dobsonian telescope. You mentioned like in passing the Geiger counters and then OpenROV. So like, can you speak briefly to what you think are like, I don't know, historically the top 5 or 6 that sort of shaped how this sort of thing evolved? Like,
so, well, like this kind of the current amateur science moment, are you saying?
No, just the overall scene of bottom-up, maker-based experimental technology and science. So things like, Dobsonians, Arduinos, all that. So like,
yeah.
Your 5 favorites. I'm curious about like.
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting because like I'm a little disillusioned about it right now, just because like we've been. I'm gonna try. The Wilson Center had this interesting thing. Wilson Center low cost science tools. Hold on, I'm gonna pull it up because they actually had a good, like an interesting little website here. Shoot. I really want to find it because it was actually kind of cool. Science Stack, tools within reach. I think that's what it is.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail it with a sort of Google type question, but
no, it's all right. It's okay. So let me share my. Actually, I'll just put it in the chat. So if you see this Wilson Center thing is actually kind of interesting. They did a good job collecting all the ones that made headlines because I wasn't the only one thinking this. There were a couple of funders who were thinking this, like Tom Khalil and Moore Foundation. You can click on these little tabs and it'll come up and show you all of these little ideas. It's more like the fold scope is really interesting. The $1 origami telescope. The CubeSat standard, I think, was super important. Anyways, like I also think these connected sensor devices, like you think about iNaturalist, the app where you can identify species, is really interesting. There's the Audio Moth, which is doing distributed ocean or distributed audio bioacoustic recording. OpenTrons, has been a staple of DIY biolabs, and now is doing a lot of stuff. OpenEnzyme is doing a lot of cool stuff. Anyways, there's a bunch of things in there. You can kind of go through and see them. Is that a good start?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so I see a question from Eric in the chat. And Eric, you want to go first and then we take it from there?
Oh, sure. Sure, I was wondering, you mentioned about quadratic funding, and I haven't searched while you were talking, but I just wonder where it looked like a pretty important step in your presentation, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
So basically, the way that funding has worked, like prize funding, is a lot like X Prize, where people put up money and then everyone competes to try and win it. Quadratic funding is something that has emerged out of the crypto community, but it's a kind of an old idea of participatory contest where I just put a link in there that says WTF is quadratic funding. And it's actually like a short 2-minute video that really explains it pretty well. And it was put together by the Gitcoin community. So I point you there, but basically it's a way, it's an idea and a way to kind of fund public goods. So like basically everybody put like, there's a pot of money, like $1 million, and all the projects submit to try and win this. And people can back the projects by voting with like $1. And so and then proportionately that $1 million gets split up amongst those projects based on the number of votes. So it's kind of like a democratizing, hopefully a democratizing force for contests, because contests are kind of, they're just winner take all, which is what science has become anyways. So it's not really like solving any problems to have X prizes for science. But this quadratic funding idea actually starts to distribute funding in an interesting way. And so we've run a number of these prizes. I don't have a lot of money, but like, you know, I've been able to do them at $5,000 and $10,000 amounts. And it's been an interesting distribution.
And so on the distribution, have you seen any emerging pattern or interesting mechanism come into place? You know, where, I mean, you showed a slide about a kind of an open insulin, I guess, device or the tester, okay? And I mean, such kind of projects usually they can't get any funding, okay? Because I don't know, a government will choose five main topics, and if we are not in those topics, we never get any funding actually. And I have a lot of friends, you know, in the psychology department, and they never get any funding because of that. Okay? And so, do you see any pattern in the distribution that we can't see in the usual way of funding at the government level?
A little bit, but it's not. We've only run a couple of these. You know, I wish I had more money where I could run lots and lots of them. Basically, what I've been trying to do with Experiment this year is just prove that we can do all this stuff. And now I'm pitching foundations to say, like, now we need to underwrite, you know, this much to test it. To be honest, so far, people just like, I don't know if I didn't explain the rules well enough, but people don't read the rules. Like people just are like on there thinking there's funding available and trying like, so I am a little, the crypto community seems like weirdly obsessed with trying like alternate funding mechanisms and playing with ideas to do this. And they seem really engaged in the process. So I don't know where like how well it's going to translate to science funding, because scientists, like I said, are so, they've been so trained by these institutions to just have these like these one-track minds that I don't know. It's going to take a little bit more than that to get them off of that track. But we do have. I mean, if you go to experiment.com, any like legitimate, you know, rigorous project can launch there. That we're in a limited amount of countries right now: U.S., UK, Canada, Australia. So if you have a bank account in those, you can launch a project. But we have a bunch. We're funding all sorts of weird projects on that site.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And can I ask if the money comes together with mentorship? The reason why I'm asking is because I'm involved in a social innovation project, and what they found is if you give a little bit of money, but also require the people to take mentorship, then they are much less likely to think about you only as a source of money, and it filters out a lot of the people who just are looking to scrape together another $50,000-$100,000. So they have a network of mentors, and the mentors are, by definition, very involved in whatever the people are doing. So you can avoid them. So if you want to do something, so you take the money on the mentorship, and if not, you don't.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing now. So I think that's the right way to do it. I also think it matters, like, if it's people that the early career researchers or entrepreneurs respect, if they get money from them, it matters even more. So I've been pitching this idea of science angels, and so that's what we're doing. We're giving them the budgets and letting them allocate it, and we're trying to, because like we're looking at Y Combinator. I was actually talking to one of the founders of Y Combinator, and they were like, everyone thought we were crazy because they were like, you're never going to be able to sit on that many boards, and you can't invest small amounts in that many companies. But they were like, we're not going to sit on any boards, and we're just going to have these cohorts for 8 weeks or whatever, and we're going to let them teach each other, and we're going to kind of be there as mentors. But so I think this idea of association, cohorts, small amounts of funding can go a long way in science, especially right now, because like there's the post-apocalypse of all these researchers stuck in this kind of career purgatory is really kind of sad and scary. I mean, it's like a lot. It's going to be like a lost generation potentially.
Can I ask, when you talk about science, and you're also talking about science tools, so do you have any lines that you draw between the two? I mean, the OpenROV is a science tool. It's incredible, and so is the Folderscope, but it's not science. I have nothing against it. I'm just wondering.
Well, I actually do think tools are a big part of science, and I think that's a really, like, I think that's a big blind spot of the academy, is just thinking that like theory and experimentation are all that matters. Tools are a huge part of science, and it's one that they kind of brush under the rug. But there's a researcher named Peter Gallison who wrote this book, Image and Logic, which I recommend, because he's got a wonderful theory that science advances through a combination of theory, experimentation, and new instruments. I mean, look at this past week, DeepMind released all, just like solved the problem of prediction in structural biology by applying their AI to the protein folding problem. And I think that's like a good example of like a tool, a technology being applied to science. And I think sometimes experimentation is what advances science. Sometimes it's new theory, and sometimes it's new tools. And one of the things I found is when we got invited to all these ocean conferences, people are like, I can't believe you just did that. I can't believe you guys just started making this and did this. It just never crossed their mind that building tools was was something that could be done to actually advance science. It's not something that's rewarded kind of in the academic system. That was my experience. I feel like it's a big blind spot.
I have more questions, but I'll hold them, giving other people a chance first. So, anybody else?
Yeah, I'll ask. Just going back to the kind of beginning of the OpenROV project, I didn't quite get what was the spark or the kind of initial like tickle the idea that like, hey, let's make a. I saw the gold. There's gold in the mine, but like, what made you want to make a robot that goes underwater?
So Eric was the real genius. I was just like along for the ride, just documenting it. So like, I shouldn't take more credit than I ever deserve. I've just been this kind of explainer guy who's just been writing everything down. But Eric is obsessed with telerobotics. He has been since a young age, and had been working on big ROVs and doing other things, and just wanted cheaper robots. And that kind of fit with my vision of trying to figure out how to get more people to care about the ocean and to like be, curious and ask questions about the world. And he heard the story about the gold and he told me, and that was it was a pretty genuine like wanting to explore that cave, but also like just figuring out any excuse just to build the robot. But that cave story just turned out to be so important. There's a filmmaking term, the MacGuffin. Alfred Hitchcock created this, like the story that starts the story. And I'm now convinced that like MacGuffin design is really underrated. Like I think people should think about that really carefully, because that I just like it, we used that story for 10 years, and it was just every time we told it, it was like automatic. Journalists would write about it, new people would get excited about it, and it was automatic. And so I think thinking about that kind of origin story is really worthwhile in the applications. I have a bunch of thoughts for you all about what the path that you're going down, because I think it's really interesting. And I think like some of the things that I wish I would have known when I went down this path are what to look out for, right? Like I mentioned Blue Robotics finding this weird problem around thrusters. I think we solved this problem around tethers and like being able to communicate over twisted pair. But I think as you go down this path, don't be surprised if you run into really interesting technical solutions that are applicable, that NASA would never, you might think, oh, NASA's figured out everything. I think you'd be surprised. Like the constraints you guys are putting on your project are pretty extreme. And so you might find things that are surprising. And I think to being open to being surprised there. The other thing I would think about really carefully is interfaces. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about telerobotic interfaces. There's not that many people who are seriously playing around with telerobotics. Ben Reinhardt just posted this. I'm going to find this, put this in the chat. This big treatise on telerobotics and why he thinks it's underrated. I don't agree with all of his bottleneck thoughts here, but like there's some general direction stuff here that's really interesting. When I hear about the ambition of exploring your backyard, I love this. Eric and I like had this side project for many years where we were building, we called it the backyard adventure machine. But everyone always thinks of telerobotics as going to distant places like Mars or going to under the ocean like miles deep. But you can also do really interesting things with size, right? Like, or time. I think if you're serious about exploring Mars, like then you're gonna have to deal with this time component. But like shrinking down and going like almost like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Like there's some interesting like visual challenges and some like interface stuff that you guys are going to be playing with that I just don't know who else is playing around with that. And so like just even though like these seem like side projects and stuff, just kind of have your eyes open for these kind of areas you walk into that nobody's played around with. Because we were in those spaces and I just didn't know to look. Like we'd find these things that were interesting, but we didn't necessarily know that they were potentially valuable. And then like, decide like, this, I don't know if you want to start companies or what you guys all want to do with this stuff, but you should have a sense of that because I think that matters. Like at some point we wanted to, like we had taken money so we could sell more kits and do all these things, but then we were a company. And if you don't want to be a company, that's okay. But you should know that because then there's different opportunities and different stuff to do. Like the creators of the CubeSat standard, like has done a tremendous service and have created really interesting lives for themselves and enabled lots of people, or like Blue Robotics. Anyways, I just think there's a lot of paths you can take as you go down this that I think those are thoughts that are worth thinking about, knowing what you want, and also talking about them as a group, making sure you're all on the same page. Because there's like different ways to do it, right? Like some people want to do standard, some people just want a project, which is fine too. Anyways, so I can keep going and rambling, but I don't know if that's useful.
You else have more questions?
One question about the kits. Like, was it? How did you get it manufactured, and what was the scale at which you were operating?
The kits we were making ourselves. I mean, we bought a laser cutter and we were just hammering this out. And you know, Venkat, I know you were tweeting about crimping stuff, and I just remember I have this, like, I call it the darkest winter, where like I just had to crimp all these wires like to get them out shipped before Christmas, and it's like I just like have totally blocked out that like memory. But we were doing it. We hired a few people and we were packing boxes and we throwing pizza parties and all that stuff, just to like have friends come over and pack boxes.
How many like pieces did you sell? Like the kits?
They were like 50. I'm trying to pull it out. Like, you know, we had an overly complicated thing. I mean, because ours had to be waterproof, you know, go down to 100 meters, which is a lot of pressure, withstand salt water. Yeah, there was like 50 pieces because there was like 25 plastic pieces that had to be, you know, epoxy together. So it was a lot.
And how many units did you end up making before it went commercial with so far?
We probably shipped close to, that's a good question. I think maybe like of the kit version, probably between 500, probably as close to 1,000, I would say 500 and 1,000. I don't actually remember that, but I think it was 1,000-ish. And I think that's a good way to think about it. Once you get in the kit stage, is like, well, actually, I think that's just a good way to think about the whole project in general, is like by scales of 10. Like, okay, how do we build one of these things? And like, that's the prototype phase. That's where you guys are at right now. And I think the next interesting stage is like, how do we build 10 of these or 100 of these? And like these, like, how do we get kits out to 10 or 100 people who can collaborate on this, like a similar design, and start really getting like the collaborative juices flowing, working on the software, things like that. So like, that's an interesting scale to think at that I think you guys will pass through. And then you have to start thinking about like, okay, what if we're going to make 1,000 of these? We're going to make 10,000 of these. And that's when it starts to become a company. And it's like, then you actually need a whole different group of people, like production engineers, you know. Josh, you built, like, you know how to set up production lines and do all that stuff. It's like, it's a whole different thing.
So related to that, can you speak a little bit about the social scaling? Like this group, I just sort of randomly floated the idea and these guys showed up. I'd never met any of them before. And it was kind of interesting because all my other previous social media stuff that I've done, like you've been to some of my events and stuff, it was kind of like a different crowd. The usual suspects would show up. And if I said something like I'm doing a meetup here, a typical kind of person would show up. And what's interesting here is that new kinds of people have shown up. And when you're talking about like how do you scale to like building a kit of, you know, 10 units that you ship out and more and so forth, how does the network grow from, I guess we're at 6 people now, how does it get to like 10, 15? What do these people do? Like what's the social scaling path for projects like this?
This was the size of our team, you know, between 10 and 20. I mean, the first people who showed up, I mean, half those people ended up being employees or whatever. So we ended up doing it together. I mean, you know, like we started the company. So then pretty soon people were hanging around all the time. And then you know, everyone had jobs. And then we realized that we wanted to, you know, like keep paying people. So we had to figure out how to make a better company. Anyways, so that's how it worked for us. I mean, the initial core people, a lot of them became employees. I think the social scaling, like,
what about like somewhat more peripherally attached people, like people who contributed a little bit or bought some of the early prototypes and did a lot of testing and validation, that kind of thing? Like it's like you grew an ecosystem.
Yeah. Sounds like, right? Yeah. Here was the #1 rule for us: is to make sure that everyone was always having more fun than before they came. So like that, you know, like we always tried to make it so that like no matter, even if like the builds weren't working, that we were still having fun. People will come and go. People will show up and say they're going to help, and then they disappear. Happens all the time. Some people just stick around, and it's surprising who it is. And it never mattered to us because we were always like, to us, this was a big party. Like literally, it was a party. We would go. You know, one time we took a trip to Baja and we're on a sailing vessel for 2 weeks, sending robots down looking for shipwrecks, and we'd rent cabins at Lake Tahoe and like just invite everyone from all over the world and just have a weekend hackathon. And those were so fun and so productive. And then we'd invite like people who, you know, weren't employees, but were just friends of the project. I think the important thing is to, you know, create a forum and just make it welcoming. I mean, our project was always so welcoming because I was such a noob, right? Like I'm not an engineer or scientist. And so I was always asking people like, hey, can you explain that? Like, because I don't know what's going on. And I would just write it down and communicate it. And I think having the kind of really noob attitude all the time, like made it welcoming for new folks. So I think like, you know, trying to keep that aspect in mind, I think is really important. And, you know, I mean, if you guys are all technically like on, you know, moving on to the level, I mean, it's not hard to find a resident noob. I mean, Eric and the team found me. So, you know, you can find them and those people will show up and, you know, give them a job documenting things and trying to figure out how to make it easy for new folks. So I don't know if that helps. Like, you know, I was trying to like, I'll just give you like one piece of advice. Like, I was like looking at the Yak Rover project, and like I was like, okay, I'm gonna prepare for this. I want to see these things. And I went to the Yak Collective and the Yak Rover, and it's like, and then I went to the Discord to try and find it. It was kind of like hard to find. And I think that was the thing about OpenROV is like the forum was openrov.com was just the forum. Like, you know, like it was like a little like news. And so it was pretty easy for people to see the discussion. And we had the, you know, if you're new, start here into the top. And that's how people got it kind of going. And then we did what you're doing, had weekly calls, community calls. So you're doing it. I know it feels slow, but like these things, like it's hard to build things and it takes time and then it starts speeding up. So the one thing I would say, if you can manage the build days or like the meetups and the get-togethers, it's just so motivating for everyone to like get their projects done or bring something to show. And they're just such a fun, those were just like the highlights. Those are the best memories I have of the whole thing.
Were all your members mostly in the Bay Area? Because that's one big challenge for us. We have like 6 countries here.
Yeah, they were. A lot of them were, but we had people from all over the country. I mean, people came from Sweden or Vancouver and all over. I think, you know, one of the things that you guys have going for you is like you're building telerobotic systems, you know? And I think this is one of these things where like the interface of, you know, we're going to explore a forest in Poland, or we're going to explore this and we're going to experiment with controls. Like you could do it remotely, right? But just like, I don't know if the meetup was as important as the like just putting the date on the calendar, like, hey, this is our big demo day. Like, and just kind of like setting some deadlines for yourselves, even though you don't really have deadlines, you know, like that I think is important. Like fun deadlines, you know, like if everything goes to crap, like whatever, no big deal. But like you'll want to impress each other, you know, and I think that matters in these kinds of things when it's a side project for a lot of people, when it's when it's fun, like, you know, this is like an my interpretation is this is an amateur project, right? Like you guys are doing this because you love it and you find it's interesting. Like there's way better ways to make money. I hope everybody knows like this is not like a smart business idea.
Yeah, I think
So-
that is clear. All right, more questions? We are
Yeah, like
almost-
what is the current status of OpenROV, the forum, and so are people still using the forum? If somebody wants to build something, what's the
Oh, you know what? OpenROV forum might still be going. I can't go there anymore because it just hurts my it just hurts too much. There's too much like baggage for me. Like people I might still be there. Blue Robotics has done a wonderful job like nurturing that like DIY community that was kind of started on the OpenROV forums. They've like continued that business and are continuing to provide parts and kits, and they're doing a great job with it. So we like I said, we built a commercial product, and then all of a sudden we'd raised a bunch of money, and then we needed to find a better business, and we ended up merging with this other company to form SoFar. And we now SoFar is cool too. I mean, we're creating these like massive, you know, we kind of, our hardware team kind of came together to build these massive sensor networks around the world's oceans, but it's just that's just a different thing.
Wait, are you involved with SoFar, or is that mainly Eric's thing?
Eric left too. Eric is now SoFar is like a whole other company. It's like got a CEO and a board, and like I mean I'm still a co-founder, but I'm not there at all. You know, I'm not actively working on it, but it's a really cool company. I'm going to show you what Eric is doing because you'll like this. Eric was chosen as the one of the stars of the new James Cameron BBC television show that's exploring the world's oceans on Ray Dalio's most advanced ocean research vessel of all time. And so Eric is the star, one of the stars of the show, and he's like flying helicopters and driving ROVs to. I just talked to him yesterday. He's headed up to the Arctic. So he's like on some. I talk to him now occasionally, and he's just got off some submarine and seen something amazing. And so that Eric's traveling the world, exploring the world's oceans. So this might end up cool. This might end up way cooler than you think, right? Might not be a big moneymaker, but it might end up being a ticket to some real adventures.
All right, any more questions?
Yeah, I would like to hear a little bit more ramble about the directions that you could take if you're not trying to make money or sell over 100 kits. I mean, for example, what you said about CubeSat. Now, we don't want to just make a standard, but something like CubeSat, I think, would be interesting. So if you could ramble a little bit more about other directions not taken, it could definitely give us ideas.
Yeah, I'm actually currently obsessed with standards. I think standards are a really underrated idea, especially in the real world. So there's a specific type of standard that I think is important, and I've been calling it a disruptive standard. Hey, look, I was just going to pull that up too. This is a great book. So I interviewed the authors last week, and as soon as I get around to publishing all these interviews I've done, but we had a great conversation about disruptive standards. So not like doing the IEEE stuff, but just figuring out the ways that work for a lot of people. So when I think about your project, I think that I would take a look at Ben Reinhardt's telerobotics bottlenecks in there. Like I said, I don't know that he's got everything right, but I think he's headed down a really interesting path. I think telerobotics is really underrated. I think it's underrated because it's so close in proximity to autonomous systems, and all the capital and talent and all these people like rush in to work on robotics get sucked into um, autonomous systems and kind of stop thinking about telerobotics. And I think there's a bunch of really interesting problems to solve in that realm. And so I would, and then the other thing is the interfaces, right? Like, I mean, we just scratched the surface. Like we were getting latencies down to 80 milliseconds, you know, across the country. Like just the possibilities for telerobotics are right there. And there's very like little work understanding what those interfaces might be for those kinds of experiences. So,
David, in your mind, by telerobotics, do you mean?
I mean the experience of
remote robotics.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
like kind of what we're doing right now, where we're having an experience through the machine. I think this idea of robotics being in distant worlds or local worlds in novel configurations, novel ways, and experiencing that. Like, I just think the interfaces, we're just still figuring it out. I don't think that like it's going to be like Zoom. I mean, all of, you know, the VR goggles are the obvious thing. Like, okay, well, maybe it's VR. I don't know that that's the case either. Like, I think maybe like we started experimenting with, you know, bigger screens and groups of people. It's wildly fun to do this with groups of people. And so figuring out the ways that groups of people can interact and control things or trade off. Like, I just think all of that stuff is, nobody knows, right? Like the big oil and gas companies use ROVs and NASA uses ROVs, but what you guys are potentially doing is creating massively collaborative experiences. And
I should mention Myra's already done something like this. A couple of weeks ago, we had a session where he had his robot in his garden exposed via the internet for telerobotic control through the Discord. So people could type commands to the rover on the Discord channel, and the spider bot would do that in his garden. So we've kind of like already started down that path quite a bit.
Well, that's great. And what I'll say to you in that is like, you're on the edge of what people know about that. It's funny, there's a book about this exact thing.
there is also a Google X Prize, no, not Google, an X Prize on the Avatar something that started a few years ago, sponsored by ANA. Have you heard about that?
No.
It's one of the X Prize. I think it started 2 years ago, and it's about avatars.
You know what though? Like like if you read Ben's piece, he's kind of on a similar thing. He's like, oh, we're gonna have these other robots and like haptic feedback suits and like all these things. That might be true. I actually think you all will be, what you're talking about, that experience in the garden. I think you're closer to the actual thing that's gonna be next in the world than those like fancy demos at those big robotics conferences. I honestly think you're going to be closer. And I think just go into that with an open mind of like, what is the good experience here? Like, how do we do that? Like, because I don't know. I just think it's totally up for grabs and we don't know. And it's, but I will tell you, like, we would give these demos. We'd have these game controllers, and we'd have robots in Hawaii that we could fly from San Francisco, and we'd give them to kids and just watch them play, and they wouldn't put it down. Like, they were obsessed with it. And so, like, you know, figuring out those kinds of interfaces, I think the connectivity is there, the latency is going to be, the latency's down enough where you can have these experiences. I don't know. I wish I could tell you what the future is going to be there, but I can tell you that we got right up to the edge of it and kind of like stopped. I like some of the team members are still working on this because it was so compelling. But I'll tell you, it's a very unsolved thing, right? Like, it's like the There's no answers to this yet. So anyways, those are my best ideas. I wish you luck. I'm gonna keep tabs on it. Invite me to one of the garden sessions. I would love to come explore the garden.
Definitely, and I think after this next cycle of meetings, like we rotate, each of us leads a session, talks about our build status and sort of lessons learned and so forth. So after this next cycle, the plan is in fact to try and go more public, do a more public event. So hopefully we'll start working on some of the sort of deficiencies that you pointed out. Like, yeah, we really don't have a good interface for people to find us easily and interact and so forth. All right, so any other final thoughts? Thanks a lot, David. This was extremely helpful. And I think personally, I found that you validated a lot of what all of us are already thinking. So it's kind of like confidence building to see that, all right, we're at least on the right track. And it's good to hear so far we haven't made any terrible blunders and like how we designed this stuff. So far, we've kept it like potentially good. So thanks a lot. And I guess we can stop recording now and we'll do something with the video and ping you when we put it up.
Yeah, maybe because I was thinking, yeah, because I was talking about other people's projects that maybe it's less good to like post it so widely. I mean, you can post it on your groups and stuff like that.
Yeah, totally. It's mainly for the Yacht Collective members itself. But if you have concerns about that,